In this clip, we're going to be learning about opacity and masking. So opacity is the property that controls the transparency of something in After Effects. So at 100% opacity, something is completely opaque. For instance, like this cape, we can't see through the cape at all. But if I come down here to the cape and twirl down its properties, and I'm looking at the transform properties, you can see opacity there at the bottom. And I can just hover over this 100% value and drag it down. And now you can see that it does not discriminate for which layers we can see underneath it. It just all across the board has become 53% opaque rather than 100. And we can see the buildings as well as the sky and our character's little outfit. This allows us to be able to create things that are semi-transparent. And you can key this property also over time if you want something to grow or lose its opacity over time. It's something that is easy to key just right over there. Now, I want to show you some other options for transparency and other ways you can do it without the opacity property. So there's also going to be masking. Now, one way that you may mask something is for a large mask, like a vignette. So a vignette is going to be that kind of halo around the outside edge of this. Now, a lot of times you'll see a dark vignette, like you might see in a camera, where you kind of have that fade, or like an Instagram filter. But in my case, I want to create a lighter vignette around the outside edge to make it almost look like there's some sort of a shiny sun effect. So let's create a new solid. And I'll just do this kind of light yellow color. Maybe make it just a little bit lighter than that. And I'll just come up here to the top and choose the ellipse tool. Now, if you don't see the ellipse tool, you may see the rectangle tool. You can just left click and hold and come down to the tool that you want. Then I'll just left click up here in the corner and click and drag down. And I've created an ellipse. Now, this isn't doing exactly what I want because the color is all on the inside. Now, there's a few different ways I can control this mask to make the color go on the outside. Right now, this is what's called an additive mask. So we have add selected, and that is by default. But if I choose subtract, you'll see that that puts it on the outside. Now, if you don't want to go through having to just toggle between add and subtract by going into that little menu, you can also just check on inverted. You can see there's other options too, like intersect, lighten, darken, and difference. And those are going to be a little bit more complicated and things that you might use later on in a more difficult situation where you're trying to achieve something else. In our case, just checking on inverted works perfectly. Now, the mask itself has a few options. If I twirl down this little arrow on the side, you'll see that I have my mask feather option. And if I turn this up, this is what starts to give it that really nice vignette feel, where it's a soft fade. Now, I'm going to choose my selection tool because I don't really like how big this fade is on top of my buildings. I love the way it looks in the sky, but I'd like to flatten out the bottom of this mask. So if I click this anchor point, you can see that I get two handles on either side. And if I click this one, I can start to drag it and pull it out and make that flatten out just like I was describing. Now, what if I want to do it at the same time and I don't want to just control one side at a time? I'll just hit Control Z and I can come up here and choose a tool. So if I left click and hold, by default you should have the pen tool there at the top. And I want to choose the Convert Vertex tool. So I'm just going to left click. Now if I just left click, you can see that it takes the handles away. It doesn't do the flattening out quite like I wanted. It creates more of a point. So what I wanted was for the handles to be longer on both sides. So I'll click it again, that's a left click, and just drag it out. Now, if I'm worried that I may get it a little off here by making it diagonal, I can hold Shift, it will constrain it. So now I'm holding Shift, and even if I move the mouse up and down, as you can see, the handles don't move. So let's just flatten that out nicely there. And then let's switch back to our selection tool. I'm actually going to left click and hold Shift again and pull this down. So we get even less of the halo effect on the buildings at the bottom. Now this is starting to really shape up. Something else I'd like to show you how you can mask is with a little bit more precision than just using the ellipse. So let's twirl some of these back up and select our city this time. What I'd like to do is just say maybe we don't want this crane on top of that building. So I'm just going to middle click and toggle the hand tool and then zoom in just using that middle mouse wheel. And what I'd like to do is just draw a little shape around this crane. So I'll come up here, and instead of using that convert vertex tool, we'll just grab the pen tool. And then I can just begin left clicking. And you can see that I can draw any shape that I want. But again, we do have the add by default set on the mask. So I'll just want to toggle that down and choose invert. Now, if I'm unhappy, let me just click away to deselect this layer. If I'm unhappy with the line that this has created here, it is a little jagged. I can again go in and maybe we just flatten this out a bit. You can see that I was moving the whole mask, so I needed to deselect and then just grab one point of the mask to be able to control it more easily. That's much better. So now we have our crane taken away by using a mask that we were able to create with the pen tool. Now what if I want to take this crane off as well? Let's come over here and try that on this one. So I have one mask. I'll just select my pen tool. And this time, I want to take off this part as well. And maybe just a little bit more. So I'll go down low. And I'm going to hold Shift. And that will make me draw a straight line right across. So I don't have to worry about trying to move the anchor point up or down to make it even like I did before. And this time, instead of having to draw a bunch of points, I'm going to click right here. And instead of just letting go of the mouse button, I'm going to drag it out. You can see that gives me some handles and allows me to just quickly draw the shape I need on this side to cover that up. And then I can just left click to close it. Now, if this building had been a little bit taller, it may have cut this away and we wouldn't have desired that. So I can just come over to this handle and pull it in a little bit. Now, what if I wanted to do that, but you can see that the handle on the other side is also moving? What if I just want to control it on this one side? I can hold Alt to toggle that convert vertex tool that we were using earlier, and it will allow me to break those handles so they're no longer controlled together, and I can pull this in for a lot more streamlined mask on that side. Now, one thing you may be noticing is that the mask isn't taking effect at this point, and that's because the mask is set to add. And like we learned before, whenever we have a little bit more complicated situation, like this one, for instance, where we have two masks on one object, like the city on one layer, we can't just use the inverted because you can see that that doesn't have the desired effect for me just to check on inverted, and I don't really need to invert it because there's nothing there to flip. It's not doing anything at all. It's as if it has no effect. So a better way to do this when you have a layer that has two masks, instead of just choosing the inverted option, change them both to subtract. So that's a situation where you might need to know when to use subtract versus inverted. If you only have one mask on a layer, just check inverted. It's super quick. But if you've got a little more complex situation, you may have to start messing with the mask mode to get it to do what you choose. All right, let's move on to our next clip where we'll learn about blend modes.